Good morning, everybody.
Good morning,
Hello.
Good
everybody.
morning.
Hello.
It is so thrilling to be in a waiting room. It gives a feeling for, a real meeting. Welcome to day 2. Yesterday, Alice and Mel took us through some of the whys. Why it makes sense for universities to be involved in grassroots initiatives and be closer to their constituencies, if you like, their main stakeholders, and those are the communities in which they thrive, and we hope for a long time to come. Today, they will be focusing on the whats, the whos, the whens, all of those questions that I know that are at the back of our minds. And a reminder to everyone that some of the project details will actually be revisited by the project team after this training, because that's what we already set in the project as this training is the beginning of our detailed construction of how it will be adapted in our country. I wish us all a great day. I know a lot of expectations and thrills are set for this session today, and I know there will be working in groups as well. So let's all rock and roll and have a great day with Alice and Melanie. And I hand over to you, ladies, now, because we are bang on time to start.
Good morning, everybody, and hello from a very sunny England. Very happy today because we won the football last night. So good news for England. Finally, we win a football match. So everybody's in a good mood today, and the birds are singing and the sun is out. So very happy to be back with you. So yesterday we covered some of the introduction to the Community Research Awards, and today we get into some of the detail. And thank you for all the questions, very helpful to help us think about things. So today we're going to get down to some of the detail that you were asking about yesterday. So I'm going to talk about some of the staff that got involved with it, some of the skills we look for, the different models we've tried out, how we promoted it to community groups, why we decided to run workshops. And then Mel's going to start talking about how we dealt with inquiries from the community groups, how we matched them with our academics, how we chose the best projects to go forward, how we collected data, most importantly, how we celebrated the scheme, and the sort of timeline, how long it took us to do these things. We thought would be helpful for you for planning. So we're going to talk through some of that this morning, and then we're going to answer any questions in detail. I'll answer them in chat as we go, or we can pick them up later. Great, thanks, Leo. So to think about, so one of the most important things that we found was the staffing for the project, and the key role was the coordinator who held it all together. And this, in our university, this tended not to be an academic, but it could be an academic, but you want someone with strong project management skills. They need to be the person that everybody goes to, that gets the right paperwork to people. They will also talk to senior management, they'll talk to the community. So you want really good communication skills. You want someone who is used to mapping out time across a project. And I'm sure a lot of the skills you all have in your universities that you would have on this project anyway. We also found it really useful that somebody had some desk research skills, because quite often the community groups were asking for us to look up small bits of information for them, data that they might want to help them think about their research. So this was a key role, and for us this was about 2 days a week they worked on this project. It might be different in your university, but that was roughly, we didn't have a designated role to do it, we did it, somebody picked it up as part of their normal job. So that's how it worked in our university. So this is a key role for us. It was also really important to have the senior support. So at our university, the Vice-Chancellor was promoting the project. It was very much her idea. She'd seen something similar in Japan, wanted to develop it in a different way in Plymouth. So she was behind it the whole time. And then our Deputy Vice-Chancellor on a day-to-day was involved. He came to some of the meetings. He sat on the panel to help choose which were the successful projects. So we had quite a senior level support, which really helped. What was really important is that somebody who has a good overview of all the research at your university. So we our Deputy Vice Chancellor was involved in it was led for research, so he knew all the researchers. So if a community group said we're very interested in doing some research around rivers, he would know the researchers and the academics who worked in this area. So that was a really nice match for us. Then we had the panel who helped select the winning projects. On our panel, we had mainly academics. So we have 3 faculties at Plymouth, and we had a representative from each faculty. And we also had we had the coordinator from the project, and we had administrator as well to help us. I think if we did it again, we would have somebody external to the organisation, a stakeholder, maybe somebody from the City Council or somebody from a large voluntary sector to help us choose the successful projects. But at the time we hadn't got that far with our thinking. But I think if I did it again now, we would think again about how we did the panel and try and include somebody external to help us select the correct projects. Finally, we had our events management and administration functions. So at our university, we have an events team, and they worked very closely with us because we needed them to organise the marketing and comms. We needed them to organise workshops and the celebration events. So they were involved in all of those and worked closely. And we found it worked well by getting them involved early on so they could understand what we were trying to achieve and how we wanted to run it. That seems to cover most of the functions you'll need, and hopefully if you start thinking about those skill sets, and you would be able to find similar people within your own university to work on this project. Thanks, Mel. Thinking about models and priorities, so the kinds of discussions we had, and I think this is important to think about at the very beginning, one of the questions to ask yourself are things like, what geography do you want your community groups to come from? So we thought about, we didn't want it too big that we couldn't cope with it. Plymouth has got about 260,000 people in Plymouth, and we decided to focus on our city and our sort of outlying bits of the city, so the greater city. And we originally didn't go much further than that. We kept it quite tight. We thought that was big enough for the time, but you could have it wider if you wanted to, but we wanted a very sort of strong connection with our city. So for us, it became a Plymouth project. So think about that early on, because you might get lots of inquiries from people who are outside your region, and it could stretch your project beyond where you want it to be. Another thing to think about is community groups, and these are probably different in different countries, but for us, we focus very much on charities, smaller charities that might not have a legal definition of a charity, but would be a community group or a neighbourhood group. And then we eventually included social enterprise organisations, so small businesses with a social aim. Because we have a lot of those in Plymouth. Plymouth is a social enterprise city. It's something we do a lot of research around. And we wanted to include them because they cross over so closely with community groups. We also, the first year, we had a complete open call. We said we're interested in all research questions, and then we realised that actually that was too open and people found it too difficult. The community groups needed a little bit of guidance on the types of things we were thinking about. So in the second year, we had priority research areas. So we gave a list of the research areas we were interested in. So we said we're very interested in climate change. We're very interested in water and marine quality of our water and quality of our seas. We're interested in history, and gave a good list for people to think about. And I think that helped them kind of bring in some ideas, whereas before it was just too open and they weren't really sure the kinds of research we did at the university anyway. So we had some priority research areas each year and invited people to match themselves against those. And as I mentioned yesterday, we had a couple of restrictions, things we wouldn't do, which included business plans, funding advice, research into anything that was politically difficult. We're a naval city, Plymouth, so we have a big naval base, and we decided we weren't going to do research into military. So if we do military research, it's much more complicated because of the ethics. So we decided we didn't want to do anything with a military theme to it. So we laid down some restrictions of things that we wouldn't consider under this model. So I think for each city and each university will want to think about anything that they might not want to do. For example, you might not want to do anything around animal research, or you might not want to do there might be things in your own university that you just don't do research on that you might want to make very clear to your community groups. So a big issue for us was how we promoted it to the community sector. So what we did is we decided to map the community sector, and we got a graduate in to help us do this. So they did a piece of work, and when we did this, there was probably less on the internet than there is now, but they started researching on the internet all the different groups that we could find. So any neighbourhood groups that were meeting, any charities that were registered to Plymouth, any networks that were meeting regularly, and we started collecting a database of all of these so that we could communicate better with them. We looked at social media, looked at who they were linked with. We looked at some of the big national charities to see if they had Plymouth charities, and then we talked to our local city council to see whether they had a spreadsheet of different community groups that we could share with us. And we found that some of the other big organisations in Plymouth did have these types of networks already mapped, so we could start sharing information around how we might work with them. So once we felt that we had a really good list of community sectors, then we started promoting the scheme to them. And it was really important to think about the messaging, why we were doing this, how we were going to get in touch with them, what we wanted to get out of it, how we wanted to support the city. So we thought about very clear messaging, and we thought about some of the barriers to community groups and community members working with a university, what puts them off, how do they feel about coming on campus, how do they feel about working with us, do they find us a little bit remote and difficult to work with. So we tried to make the communication very simple, very straightforward about why we were doing this. And we tried to make sure that we weren't using lots of university language and jargon. And I think a really good thing to do, and we would do this time, would be to talk to the community and maybe pilot some of the forms with them to see how they felt about them. We didn't do that then, but I would do that if I did it again. So we would get somebody from the community and say, it's almost like asking your parents whether they feel this works. You know, how do you feel about this? Does this make sense to you? Or have I used lots of university language? So we did lots of work around understanding community groups, charities, social enterprises, and getting their contact details so we could try and find as many as we could, and asking them to share it with all their own contacts and communications as well. We thought some of the organisations that put proposals in were going to be unsuccessful and not selected, and it gave something back to them. So we were concerned that if we got 50 applications and only funded 5, there's 45 there disappointed. So we wanted to try and find something useful that we could give back, and we get a lot of organisations asking us for help with bid writing, for how to do an evaluation, how to use data. So we thought we'd try and run some fairly straightforward workshops for them, 45 minutes, talking about some of the things they might need to know about how to win bids, how to evaluate projects, that kind of thing. So we put together a morning program with lots of coffee, some snacks, invited lots of people in, and we had over 100 people turned up on the day and went to these workshops. And they were very, very successful start of our communication and running events for the community. So the target group for the workshops, just to answer Roxanne's question, we were asking all community groups to come along who were interested in these areas. So we said, come along if you want to find out more about the Community Research Awards and want to ask us any questions. Come along if you want to come to any of these workshops, if they interest, sign up for the ones that you're interested in. Or come along and just meet us and chat and have coffee and find out more about what we do at the university. So we invited our academics to come along to them, and they started to chat through some of the research ideas with the community. So it was our first attempt to really start bringing these groups together, our academics and community members, to talk about research and talk about some of the research areas in our city that they might work on jointly. So what we had was, we had a couple of our project coordinators were sat there ready, and then somebody would come up to a table and say, I've got a great idea. I'm really worried about the river quality in my local woods. The water used to be great, but now the kids play in it. The dogs are splashing in it. And it looks a bit dirty. We're not sure. It's a bit bubbly. Is that a good research project? Would you be interested in looking at that? And then we can match them with our academics who are interested in river quality, and they can start talking about how they might take that forward as a project and what that might look like. Right, so I'm going to move on to Mel's going to talk now about how we dealt with inquiries from the community, and we'll come back later.
Okay, thank you, Alice. So yeah, as well as obviously the workshops, which dealt with a number of sort of questions or inquiries that people might have had, we also established a number of mechanisms, sort of additional mechanisms for fielding any questions or inquiries that the individuals or the organisations had. So we had a dedicated Community Research Award website, and that included details about the Community Research Award, a dedicated email address specifically for any Community Research Award related queries, as well as a telephone helpline. And we also developed a set of frequently asked questions, and that was circulated out to the community groups and also to university staff to sort of field any inquiries, really reduce the number of inquiries coming into the university so that questions had already been answered, but also to ensure that all the same advice was being given out. So then, as Alice mentioned, or as we've mentioned before, the community groups, the initial stage, they were invited to complete a short application form. So they'd use this to outline the topic or issue that they wanted the university researchers to investigate. And that could be anything really that would make a difference to the group. Something as simple as a survey to find out the views of a neighbourhood or a group of service users, to maybe an environmental assessment of a piece of land. So Alice mentioned the river quality earlier, so that's a good example of one. And then once all of the applications had been submitted, they were sent to researchers across the university so that they could be matched to academics with relevant research expertise. And if they felt that they could deliver the project, then they contacted the community group, and they worked together with the community group to develop a more detailed research proposal that could be delivered within a maximum budget of 10,000. So Alice has already given a sort of an example of how this worked in practice. But if I maybe just take that one through a little bit further. So there was a local community group who'd noticed that their local river was a bit bubbly, a bit dirty. They were concerned about it because their children play there. They took their dogs walking around there. And they saw this scheme and they approached the university to see if that could be a potential area of research within the scheme. Following discussions, it was like, yes, this is definitely something worth taking forward. So we encouraged them to complete the short application form, and then match them up with relevant academics with expertise in that area. They decided that, yes, it was something that they could make into a full research proposal. So they then got in touch with the community group, worked together to develop that full proposal. So that's a costed proposal with a timeline, sort of clear indications of what would happen when. And they were one of the successful bids. So they worked with the community members to undertake the research, but they also talked to the group about what they'd found, and they actually found that the houses, some dirty water from the houses were emptying into the river. So then they moved on and talked to the local council about maybe replumbing scheme for the houses so that the water quality could be improved. So that was the outcome at the local level for the community group. The academics had fulfilled the research, but as a result of that, the academics went on to study urban river quality, both in the UK and globally. So that's kind of how the process works from a very small kind of conversation initially. This is something that we've noticed at our local area. Is it something that could be funded, through to a successful project? So obviously within that process, there was a number of community groups or applications that we felt couldn't be developed into practical and deliverable research projects. So in that instance, we would then contact the community group that their research project wasn't going to be taken forward to a full proposal. But at this stage, we did provide those community groups with some support with their research area. So what we tended to do was look for some relevant research that had already been done in their area, and share relevant research reports or articles with them that might sort of just help them with the area of research that they were interested in. So rather than just a kind of flat. So the fully worked up research proposals were then submitted to a selection panel. As Alice mentioned, this consisted of academics, professional services, and in an ideal world, we would have included some external organisations there. Alice, we had a question earlier asking how many people sat on the panel, and I wasn't sure. I don't know if you know.
I think we had 3 academics, 1 from each faculty. We had the Deputy Vice-Chancellor, me, administrator, I think somebody from events and comms, so about 6, 7, that sort of number.
Okay, brilliant. So and the panel considered all of the applications against the assessment criteria, and for us that covered the feasibility of the timescale and budget, the anticipated impact on the community group, and the anticipated impact on the wider community. And each application was rated against that criteria as either excellent, good, satisfactory, or poor, and they received a score for each one. So a 4 was an excellent, 3 for good, 2 for satisfactory, 1 for poor, and then obviously tally that one up, and you can work out which are your top proposals. And following that, up to 5 proposals were selected for an award with a maximum value of £10,000 each. And just to be clear, that funding went to the university, so it went to the academics that were going to be undertaking the research. It didn't actually go out to the community groups. What the community got was the research, but the university, for the staff time and so forth, that was what the funding was for. So the total budget for each round of the community research awards was around 50,000, bearing in mind if we did 5 each year. And again, obviously, following this process, there's going to be a number of unsuccessful applicants. So they were informed of the outcome. So we'd informed both the community group and the academic, because obviously they'd both engaged in the process at this stage. And again, we offered the unsuccessful community groups some additional kind of support. So they were offered the option to work with the university's development manager to explore the potential for funding, maybe from other charitable trusts and foundations that the university might have been able to apply for on their behalf. And we also shared with them the idea of them taking on a student volunteer placement within their organisation. So just in terms of feedback and monitoring, we did this at various stages. So following the workshops, feedback forms were distributed to ensure that any improvements could be taken on board for future events. The successful projects that received an award, the academic team was required to provide short progress reports and learning points at various intervals. And then we also did various sort of celebration events. So in order to celebrate the success of the Community Research Awards, the university held a big community event whereby the award winners were announced and celebrated. So all the award winners were invited to this. There'd be some presentations, and each award winner was presented with a winner's certificate. So there was lots of photography, lots of, just a really sort of positive vibe. Alice mentioned, there was a buffet and some drinks and just a real nice celebration event. And I thought it would be useful just to share an overview of the broad timescales of the community research process. So this just takes you through from the initial call for proposals, so that very, very first stage, sort of where you're engaging with the community groups, asking them for their initial kind of expressions of interest or short application forms, through to the workshops, got a deadline then for the receipt of their applications, and then whether or not they'll be developed into a full proposal, and then the award winners selected in the celebration event. And that takes around 7 months, that whole process. And then following that, we allowed, I think it was around sort of a 15-month deadline for the research to then be completed. But obviously some research projects would take that long, some would be a lot shorter. But within that timescale, as I mentioned, there were a few points where the academic team had to report back so that we could keep an eye on how things were progressing and developing. So, and then a question about the funding. So the community groups didn't actually receive any of the funding. The funding only went to the academics at the university, but there was no expectation. The community groups didn't need to contribute any funding whatsoever, but because it was the academics undertaking the research, the funding went internally, if you like, to the academics to provide the research. So that was what the community groups got. The research was undertaken for them kind of for free in that regard.
And meanwhile, do you consider IPR issues or not? Because anyway, universities involved more or less in the process.
Yep, we did look at IP. So we our IP managers sit in the same team as me, and so we did just run the ones that we thought were going to be successful. So when the panel looked at them, we just ran them past our IP managers to say, is there any IP or consideration?
We had a form as well, I think more like a contract document as well once for the successful projects that outlined who owned the IP from the research and everything like that. So there was kind of a standardized document that just, made all of those aspects clear.
Concerning the hours, so my question is more general. Do you take some steps ahead, for instance, to advise or to foster these people who already had got some awards to go to another announced prizes, etc., or something like not only supporting recommendations in order to go to apply for another prize, of course, either for the research novelties or for useful products for community, etc., because there are a lot of competitions, a lot of prizes, and I mean that it's not a bad idea to support our winners to just try for another competition or for another prize.
I think at the time we didn't encourage our academics enough to do something different with the research. I think if we did it again, we would look at meeting with them towards the end to talk about where they go next with it, what they might do with it, other research funding they might go for. Some of them did this themselves. They were quite, they were very forward thinking. They started doing lots of work with the community groups and applying for funds from our research funders for research, but not everybody did. So I think we would look at doing that differently next time.
Two questions. The first one is, can you describe some obstacles that you find to motivate researchers to enter this kind of process, and how you tackled these obstacles and overcame the obstacles?
I think a good question. So the first year, I think the big obstacle was nobody had done this before. And it seemed, I think, it may be the same at all universities, but our university, our academics are used to their own research questions, their areas they've specialized in their PhDs. They want to think about those questions, and suddenly we were asking them to think about something very different that the community were interested in. So I think one of the obstacles was the way the community groups put the research question wasn't the way academics are used to seeing it. It looked maybe a little bit basic. It didn't quite excite them enough. So there was a little bit of an obstacle there where we found that if we looked at the research question and turned it into something very much related to their research area, they suddenly got a bit more interested. So I think that was one of the first obstacles.
So I was going to say, as well, from the outset, we did some work to also promote the scheme to the academics. So really telling them kind of what was in it for them, kind of giving them reasons to get involved. So, for example, we highlighted that they might be able to generate some impact case studies for REF as a result of it. The research could help them sort of apply for future external funding applications, or maybe thinking more about the student experience side of things. It might create some volunteering opportunities for students, might raise their profile in the research world, or if they were in a research central group, it would help to sort of raise that profile. And also, as Alice said, really building a sustainable and rewarding relationship with kind of research users in the community. So I think there was a bit of work at the outset, just promoting it to academics, to kind of what's in it for them kind of thing as well.
And the second question is related to what both of you just said about the 10 years of experience. Is there a dimension to start with you would recommend? I mean, listening to you about the obstacles and the processes, it seems that it could be ideal in the beginning to sort of narrow down things and focus on specific actions, then build up on this experience to further develop the dimension and broaden the dimension. And linked to this, and thinking about some conversations that we, together with my colleagues at Psiquadro, that is a social enterprise, and with universities we work with over the last months, one of the main thought was what you just said about the relevance of the questions coming from citizens. But when we mention schools as a citizens group, they reacted differently, as if starting from a very naive perception of citizens, they value more to interact and start this interaction and this experience with students. So the question is, could schools or students be a group of citizens that submit proposals?
We didn't have any schools. I don't think we actually said no to schools, but I can't remember any schools coming forward. But we did have some of the counselling services that work with schools. So we had a charity that works with children who've lost a parent and bereavement, and we had a charity who works with children whose fathers are in prison, and they wanted research done around their experiences of what that was like. So some of those organisations that work around schools did get involved, but the schools didn't. And I can't remember us saying no to schools. I just don't think we probably reached out to them. Students, I think we didn't want questions from our own students because we thought we could end up just talking to our own students and ourselves. But students outside of our own university, we would just treat them like any other community.
Starting from zero in a community, the question is, where is the best way to start with, to start this motivation process? That was the point.
Yeah, I think we found the easiest organisations to work with were charities that had a paid worker, because they had someone you could email. If they are too small, a community group, they had nobody to talk to because nobody was paid to do that job, and often they weren't there for a couple of weeks, and then the academics would go off and do teaching, and it would just not work so well. So we did realise that the very small organisations we had to be a little bit careful with if we were going to do a very ambitious research project with them. So we kind of just thought that through each time. What we didn't want to do was to have a failed project. So we wanted to just make sure we were choosing ones that looked like, at least from the 5, 3 or 4 looked strong ones, and maybe we take a risk on one, but we wanted to make sure we had a good selection. And I think, now 10 years later, we have lots of things that go on at our university. So we have a law clinic at the university that's run by our students, our trainee lawyers who work out in the community and do free legal advice. And we have an office on, any community member can come onto our campus and get free legal advice from our law clinic. We didn't used to have that, but now we have all of this going on, and we do free dentistry and free healthcare for all of our city from our students that run it. So we link into our community all the time now. But this is new for us. We've developed this over the last 10 years, So it has really been a catalyst.
So I have actually, I think, 3 questions. First of all is that, okay, finally, who was paid in terms of salaries? Is it just the core team you mentioned on slide number 2 there? Are the researchers from the universities that were involved somehow paid? And the members of the community groups? So besides the grant they received, were they anyhow paid? I mean, yeah, in terms of salaries, who got the salary?
So for us,
First question, yes.
okay, the money, so the roughly £10,000 per project went to the academic team. So the community didn't get any money. So they just got time from the academics. So the money went to usually to a research assistant who would be on a temporary contract. So it wasn't going to a senior professor because they're already being paid by the university. It would go to somebody that didn't have permanent tenure with the university. So most people used it to extend research assistant salaries.
My question is the second one. How does a community group look like? I mean, my question is, you organized the workshops. Yes, okay. In the workshops, there were some kind of ideas coming. If you just realized that 2 ideas might be put together, did you try to form a group of different organizations, or a community group means one organization? I'm not sure if, yeah.
Yep. So for us, the community group was normally one organization. So it would normally be a collection of citizens coming together in a neighborhood or around a theme. So it might be something like a small charity, might just be 5 people, but who come together on a similar issue. So that was how we saw a community group.
But these 5 people, they come from the same organization, or they are from different organizations? Like, for instance, a company is interested in doing some kind of research, but it's only one company, yes? And of course, inside the company, there are 2, 3, 5 people that might get involved. This is a community group, or you mean a community group like 10 companies or 10 organizations, different organizations, but having a common interest in one topic?
It would be usually the first one. So it would be one organization with several people in it.
Okay, I see.
Yeah.
And once you, yeah, I understand. Perfect. Thank you. And the last question is, once you realized you can match one researcher with one company or with one community group, who developed the project application form? It was both the 2, or the researcher plus the community group, or it was the researcher, or the project application came from whom? It came from
the second one, the main one that we judged came from the academic, but there's a question on our application saying, did you involve the community group in this application and how? So we expected them to not just take it off and do it themselves, but to involve them, talk to them, plan it with them, but for the academic to do the work of writing it up and submitting it.
Okay, and it was only one researcher, one academic, or a group of academics?
Often it was up to them, but often it would be a couple. So usually it was a senior academic, so maybe professor level or senior researcher level, and then often maybe a research assistant or 2 research assistants. So there may be a couple of them.
Okay, and did you impose them some kind of results, like publishing an article at the end of 1-year project or something? No, just to develop the network?
Yeah, I think we would now. If I did it again, I'd expect an output from them. But
no, they did have to produce a report at the end.
They produced a report, but they often try to avoid doing that as well. So we had to chase them quite a lot to get the reports out of them. But I think now we would say, at least ask them what they're going to do with the research. Are they going to apply for another grant? Are they going to write a journal article? Are they going to influence policy? Maybe some of those outputs we would look to push them a bit harder on. But they were all asked to do a short report at the end of it of what had been achieved.
Mel, I just want to contextualize Roxana's question and actually respond to Roxana, do a little bit of translation in this sense. Communities, because I know exactly where your query is coming from. And to give you an example, I would imagine that Sophia University, where it is located right now, I can think of several very distinct communities which may or may not be registered as entities. And this is important because in the UK, you do not have to be registered as an entity to be recognized as a community. So for example, in Bulgaria, and I'm sure it would be very similar in Romania, we have, for example, the clubs for retired people, or that live in the neighborhood. Or there may be, in the case of Sophia University, there is within less than a kilometer away from the main building, is the seat of the association, or whatever they call themselves, of small people, people with dwarfism, which is a particular kind of stakeholder group. Or there is a community of people living along one of the rivers which crosses Sofia, and which actually the bed overflows in and floods the area. So they're a community as well, insofar as they live near this river and are affected by it. Hope that's helpful.
That's really helpful, thank you, because I know it's different in different countries how we recognise, and we had to do a lot of thinking about what we thought a community group was and who we wanted to work with, and whether they had to be registered or have a charity number, or whether we would just accept a neighbourhood collection of people. And some of the most interesting research we had was actually just a collection of people. So like the river project, it was just some people who backed onto a river who wanted to know why their river wasn't very good quality anymore. And that went on to a big project where we worked with the city council and got plumbers in and redid all the plumbing so that their washing machines didn't throw water into our rivers anymore. So it was a great output for the neighbourhood and for the city, who started thinking about some of these issues.
Yeah, I want to refer to what Roxana said about the process of writing the proposal. Did I get it correctly when you said that the writing part was done jointly by researchers and a group of citizens?
The actual writing, we expected the academic to do, so the form, but we expected them to discuss it and talk about it with the community group or communities, so that they were involved and they understood what was going in, and it was a joint discussion. But we thought the final form was a little bit longer, and we thought it was fair for the academic to write that. And they had to cost it, so they had to get some costings, and we didn't think the community group didn't think it was appropriate for them to see all the finances with the university.
Yeah. But is there the risk of having researchers writing for other researchers and just involving a citizen just to put a tick on the box and say, yes, we've done a meeting with the citizen? I'm playing the devil advocates now, because just I know the guys I'm working with.
Absolutely.
and so yeah.
I can see you have the same problem in your university as in ours. Yes, there is a problem with that people will just get the idea from the community group and then just run off and develop the research themselves and not involve them again. So that's why we have a question saying, how was the community group involved in this proposal? How did you discuss it with them? And you could put more of that into the application if you thought that was going to help. So there was an expectation they did it together, but with the writing sitting with the academic. But you could do it differently. You could say it's submitted. So it depends how you think it will work in your organisation.
Thanks a lot. It's very helpful.
Nico?
Yes, my question relates to what Leonardo said. And I was wondering, how would you think about involving more people from those local community groups that are part of the process into the very implementation of the project, actually giving them some ownership of what's being done? Basically, it's the same in other words.
Yeah, So one of the things that our government is pushing us to do more of now is to plan more with our community in our city when we plan projects and events, whereas we tend to do it what we think is a good idea, and then at the end we involve them. So we've got a whole policy of how we might involve the public in everything we do. So I think if we did this again, we would get them involved from the beginning. We'd get them to think about, we'd test some of the forms on them to see whether they work well for the community. We'd get them to think about priorities for our city, and we'd definitely get them on our panel to select the most successful projects and to think about the impact on the community.
Did you work with groups that have some legal form? Let's say they have registration in a court, or
Yeah.
depends on the legal system of the country, of course. But or you also involved informal groups, people who are gathered around a social network, or are publicly present in a way without having this legal form.
Yep, we worked with both. We started with the ones that are registered because they're easier to find, but then we also asked them, so if they worked with young people, we said, are there other groups you're aware of that work with young people that might be interested in this scheme? Could you promote it to them? I mean, thankfully now most people are on social media. It'd be a lot easier to reach out to groups than it probably was 10 years ago. But it was quite it took us a few months to try and find all these groups and connect with them. And people didn't have a very strong connection with our university, although we're in the middle of the city and they walk past us every day when they go to the train station or the supermarket. Not many people had been on campus or had any connection with the university. So we did have to try and break down those kind of concerns about what it'd be like to work with a university.
I just wanted to add that now we have a more clear picture of the whole CRA project cycle, and a lot of our questions got their answers. Of course, we now understand that a lot of improvisation will be needed in our work because first, our national context is different, and second, the funding frame we are working within is a bit different from what you are doing. But hopefully we can manage a good pilot phase of the CRA in our countries. So thank you for the presentation today, and meet you tomorrow.